My name is Aditi Seshadri. I am a partner and co founder at Unlock Impact. We are a social advisory firm that works on solutions providing solutions for climate action and gender diversity in South and Southeast Asia. So this close the gap challenge is actually, we're so fortunate to be partnering with GIZ and Her now on this because this really brings together two elements that we love. One is solutions for women, and the other is solutions by women. So the fact that this challenge actually brings all of that together is something that is really, really close to our hearts. And we'll of course talk more about the challenge later today. But more than that, I think today I'm very excited because we have this fabulous lineup of speakers with us, and this is a great example of what is actually possible when people with purpose and heart really put their minds to something. So, without further ado, I want to hand over to our speakers, but I'll just give you a quick introduction on who to expect and who to look forward today. We have Natasha Bharadwaj, who does a ton of amazing work around violence and abuse, and also works on sexual and reproductive health. We have Shraddha Pandey, who is an entrepreneur who is working on a tech platform to tackle feminine health issues. We also have another entrepreneur with us today, Neelam Jain, who is creating opportunities and livelihoods for transgender persons. And finally, we have Loy Nelson, who is actually one of the organizations that's playing a very key role in building a robust ecosystem for women entrepreneurs in India. So, on that note, I want to hand over to our first speaker for today. Our format, we're going to have four speakers. They're going to share some of their thoughts around the pressing issues that they are working with, and then we will have an opportunity for Q&A later on. Thank you so much, and over to Natasha. Please get us started.
Super. Thank you. Thank you so much for putting this together. And thank you for this great platform to share my work and a little bit about what I'm doing. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about research today, right? So in an ideal world, this is why I started to do what I did. I was like, when we come up with solutions, we gather a bunch of information on what's wrong and how to address it. So basically, I was really interested in building evidence-based solutions, and specifically how my whole journey started is I was working as a student social worker at Byclub Prison. And I was just kind of sent off the deep end to be like, go collect data. And that's where it started. And I realized, oh, okay, so we don't build evidence based solutions. A lot of our solutions to women's problems, especially when it comes to violence and crime, are actually anchored in reactions, right? So public outcry, this is what looks good, right? I'm sure many of us talk about, even see now when we're talking about rape and sexual violence, a lot of death penalty. So that's where my journey began. I wish I could go through the whole journey, but here I am to just talk a little bit about why we need to build evidence-based solutions. So as part of my PhD, I actually started working on a project which looked at basically women's pathways to incarceration, right? So what do women's lives in South Asia look like before they end up in prisons? So after being rejected prison permission some 45 times, I was able to get access to 3 prisons in India and interview 100 women. So I went in with this idea that I'm going to tell this fascinating story and build, all these kind of solutions around why women end up in prisons and what we can do. Well, the first thing that I learned is you should let your data speak to you, right? So I went in, I had certain ideas, those were not really met. I found a totally different type of stories that were being told to me, right? I realized how in India, a lot of the laws haven't changed since the British time, and we're stuck dealing with these kind of archaic notions of what women's roles in society should be, and that is why most of our problems exist today. So one of the things that stood out to me the most was the overarching, how do I say, majority of women were incarcerated related to dowry-related offenses, right? So I went in to literally build theory. I was like, let's build India, South Asia specific theory. I came out with an understanding that we actually don't know what's going on in our context. And I realized that India doesn't really have a good means of how laws should be arrived at to address women's issues. So dowry as a law was, dowry was made illegal, and then Section 498A was passed to protect victims of dowry. Surprisingly, I guess, I don't know, some people won't think it's that surprising. A lot of women in prison were ending up because of dowry related offenses. They had interacted with the victim maybe once or twice. So what I realized is there was a massive misuse of this law, right? So my idea was, what do I do with this information, right? I'm just going to go disseminate and I'm going to change the world. But turns out it doesn't work like that. So I think, when you're coming up with kind of gender solutions, right, which are anchored in evidence, you need to let the evidence speak to you. But also what's important is how and what you do with it next, right? So as I gain my own training, now I'm learning about just how tough it is to interface with the next level, right? So yes, I'm writing a report which can work as like recommendations on how to amend these laws. But change doesn't just come about at that level, right? So I'm also entering the sphere of doing public criminology, where I'm trying to disseminate information through op-eds and different kind of outlets, so that even the general population, which has misnomers around these laws, are getting educated and I guess aware. Because a lot of the times when recommendations have come around like changing laws, it looks like they're not gendered in the right way, right? So I think besides working with the government, it comes in at this public criminology level. And then also at the same time, how do I capacity build so that my solution is not just anchored in like these three prisons, but how does it look across the board? So I think the biggest takeaway for me and what I really wanted to share is that we live in a world where we quickly come about to addressing gender issues, right, without really understanding or really building evidence on why what is happening. So my institute, South Asian Institute of Crime and Justice Studies, was actually born out of that, right? So how can I bring together academics, activists, practitioners, researchers, and the next generation to really build this sort of understanding on crime and justice issues in South Asia? So I'm going to stop right here and hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I think so. One of the things that you mentioned when we were talking earlier, and I think it's interesting because you talked about the work that you were doing right now, is that how do you get started on some of these opportunities, right? And you did mention that the opportunities exist. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how do you find these opportunities, or how do you create these opportunities for people who want to do interesting work in this space? How can they make more space for themselves? Maybe you could touch upon that.
So actually, yeah, that's something I forgot to mention. There's a great demand for this kind of work, and there's very limited training that people have. So of course, right, if you have the means to get a good just kind of even a diploma course or some sort of course in building research skills. Because of COVID, we have a lot of these online opportunities to get accredited. And I think honestly, for me, that's one of the things, right? If you Google gender crime justice South Asia, my name will probably pop up. Reach out. There are actually organizations that are doing this work. So I think one of the things that stops a lot of us is reaching out. Vidhi Legal Policy Center is doing really great work. And I think the most important thing right now is to not hesitate, because there's a great demand for this work and a very limited supply for it. So if you're interested in it, please reach out to people, and literally cold call, emails. I can't tell you the amount of people I've written to and gotten no's, but part of the reason I set up my platform is to help build connections. So there are a lot of us out there who want to build this sort of South Asian network dedicated to this work. So yeah, that's why I got my PhD in America and moved back. So yeah, please reach out. And yeah, I'm hoping that it's going to get more organized, the sector. And that's one of the biggest efforts that I'm putting all my effort into. So yeah.
Super. Thank you. This is for everybody. If you have any questions for Natasha, please do share on chat, and we'll go through them. I did have one more question, maybe for now, Natasha. Is that so the challenge, for example, is focused on people who are either already creating solutions or looking to create certain solutions for, and we will of course talk about like what in which areas. So if someone was wanting to work on some of the issues that you talked about, right, which could be marginalized communities, but violence, abuse issues around that, what potentially, where should they look? What kind of areas do you think have good opportunities? Where should they explore? Do you have any advice?
So to be perfectly honest, when it comes to looking at marginalized communities and violence, there's still limited funding, but there's a lot of attractive funding that is available to Indians from outside organizations like USAID. So if you're okay doing stuff like that, you need a minimum qualification to actually apply for them. But there are also organizations that are looking for these resources. So I work with Girl Effect, right? And working as a global research specialist. So many times they need a need for like a how do I say, like a specific solution that they can get behind. So again, same thing, right? Like you can identify plenty of organizations in South Asia which have their feet on the ground that are looking for solutions to be brought to them where they have the capacity to fund it, but not necessarily the resources or the people, right? So that's another way to go about it. And if you look at a lot of the private universities in India right now, they all have these behavioral health and sciences departments, which are looking exclusively for a lot of criminal justice, violence, marginalized communities. So it's a huge field and it's really understaffed. So, I was told you'll never make money off it, but to be honest, it's so fulfilling. It's very tough on my mental health at many days, but there are a lot of avenues that are open to you that you can reach out to people and get access to funds. So yeah.
Super. Thank you so much. We are going to come back to you, but we just want to make sure that all the speakers maybe have an opportunity to share some initial thoughts. So on that note, I want to move on. So Bea, if you can just if you can move the slide. I do want to call on Shraddha to come and talk to us right now. It's interesting because Natasha, you were talking about the research and sort of the big picture of things. So then we thought it'd be interesting to get a practitioner's perspective, someone who's actually trying to develop solutions on ground. So thank you so much, Shraddha Pandey, for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you so much, organizing this talk. And I am the founder and CEO. It's a platform that we.
Shraddha, I think we'll just need you to come a little closer to the mic.
All right. Am I audible now? All right. So I'm the founder and CEO of Masika. Masika, what it does is it actually is a platform which enables women to not just take charge of their health in terms of lifestyle, but it also enables practitioners to facilitate lifestyle modification programs for women, which is a huge issue for them. Now, why I actually started Masika was because of my own personal experiences. Some 8 years ago, after having lost everything in terms of health, I decided to visit hospital. That's the natural thing to do. And, having reached there, I thought, okay, what doctor should I go and meet? There are the different symptoms. There are different multiple disconnected concerns that I was having, right? And then, my body, I am not being treated as a person in that hospital. I'm being treated as a body with different organs, right? And none of my factors which defined me or defined my health issues as a woman were being considered in. For example, there's a very small experience that I even today I'm a single parent, right? And every time I go for my gynecological consultations, the question that is being asked to assess my sexual activeness is, am I married? Right? The gynecologist straight up just asks me if I'm married, and if I say I'm not marrying, it is just assumed that I'm not also sexually active, right? So there are these systemic issues, not just in terms of sexual health, in terms of reproductive health, in terms of any on all aspects of women's life is either surrounded by myths or superstitions, right? Right from the from the school, like women, the kids are not taught about the body that well, like they'll be taught about anatomy that well. They're not taught about women's reproductive parts. They're not taught about how women are different from men in the body wise, in terms of behavior, in terms of so many different responsibilities that we share, right? So I mean, that was one of the factors that also caused me to believe that, okay, my health is not very important and I should only go to hospital when everything's actually kind of falling apart, right? And I am like, a mother. I am also a daughter. I have to look after my parents. I have to also look after my my other baby, which is my company, right? There are these multiple responsibilities that I'm navigating. And at the time when I was suffering from these health conditions, I was employed by a very good company here in India. And there I was constantly reminded about the fact that how I'm unattractive because I was fat, how I'm not productive because I would get easily tired, and I was not willing to, like, put in 13 hours 14 hours of my time into the office, right? So there were these differences that were being brought about and projected in terms of my health, and they were very sexist issues. They were not issues which were which was not faced by the other gender, right? But they were made they I was actually made to believe that, okay, it's my fault that I am a fat woman with so many health conditions that I'm actually causing problem in my company by not being, productive for 14 hours or 18 hours straight, right? And that is the kind of thinking that led me to take charge of my own health. Because see, I believe that, um, we've been talking about gender equality for centuries now, for years now, right? And then if gender equality is the end, then gender equity is the means, and that is what we are trying to do with Masika, leveling the playing field for women, at least in terms of their health, right? So like for example, men and women, gender equality does not equate men and women, right? They Gender equality is all about providing equal opportunities to both men and women, and not creating any kind of gender bias in those opportunities. But gender equity is about the fair treatment to both men and women, right? Now when we talk about fair treatment, we have to also consider the fact that we have to compensate for all the wrongs and for all the disadvantages that women have already faced in the past. Unless and until we don't compensate for all the disadvantages, for all the issues that women have been systemically facing, we cannot bring about the or close the gap per se, right? So I mean, the one reason why we decided, okay, a woman needs to have a comprehensive healthcare ecosystem and not just different apps or tools to manage her health. Because when it comes to a woman, she does not have a single responsibility. She has multiple responsibilities, multiple aspects of her life. And then we go and we tell her, okay, now because you're unhealthy, it's completely your responsibility to become healthy. That's not going to happen. Because see, when it comes to women's menstrual cycle, when it comes to their sexual health, reproductive health, every aspect of their health has been scrutinized, have been put under the superstitions, have been shrouded with myths. There are so many systemic issues around women's health, and if we are not willing to remove those before we actually talk about equality, we'll never be able to close this gap, right? So I think the whole idea of starting Masika was, after having taken charge of my health and having understood that, okay, my body is way different than how a man's body function. It functions in a very cyclical manner, and none of these women know about it. And they're just, we are made to believe that in order for us to be gender equal, or get these opportunities for gender equality, we need to we need to hustle as much as men do. But that is so not correct, right? I mean, acting like men to become their equal is like, trying to fit ourselves, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? And that is not going to happen. Complementing, eliminating all the systemic issues, leveling the playing field for women, not just in terms of their safety, in terms of their health, in terms of their financial standing, in terms of their education, in terms of sensitizing them with regards to their rights, right? These systemic issues, these systemic concerns need to be eliminated before we work towards closing the gap, right? Because otherwise we're just saying, hey, from hence, going forward, both you and, both a man and woman will enjoy equal benefits to all the material things that are there in the world, right? But then what about, because men have had that privilege to take charge of that, because the entire healthcare ecosystem is designed very efficiently to address a male anatomy successfully, but it is not designed very efficiently to address a women's anatomy like that, because you cannot separate a women's psychological, physiological and biosocial factors away from her, right? That's what makes a woman. That's what defines her, right? So I think the one of the very important factors or very important reason behind starting Masika was to provide to level the playing field for at least in the healthcare ecosystem for women, right? And that is why I'm a very strong believer in the fact that unless and until we are not going to take charge of these systemic issues creating hindrances and barriers for women's growth in any aspect of their lifestyle, we won't be able to close this gap, or we won't be able to achieve the end, which is the gender the gender equality, right? I mean, so yeah, this is this is why we this is
Yeah.
why
So Shraddha, I think, I mean, I think definitely understand the issues that you've mentioned. In fact, a lot of people who are on this call or even will be applying for the challenge will be facing a lot of this themselves, right? So systemic changes, yes. But maybe what I would like from you is that as so once you decided that, so not why you wanted to set up Masika, we understood that, but now in these initial stages, what would be like the two key things that you're facing in terms when you're actually thinking about building the solution or building a startup. What are maybe like two key challenges you're facing right now, and how would you suggest, if other people face something similar, how would you suggest they tackle it?
So see, Aditi, one thing that I keep, one of the very big issues that I'm facing while, building the solution is the lack of participation of a spouse or a partner or men in general in women's health, right? See, the whole idea with regards to superstition myths or whatever that has been, that has been created or been have aroused with regards to women's health, arise with regards to women's health is because men don't have understanding of what is happening within and outside a woman, the bio social, the psychological, the physiological changes in women, right? And unless and until we're not allowing men to be a part of this whole conversation, understand what separates a woman as a woman, what defines a woman as a woman, how is her health different from mine, and why does she require different set of treatments which are actually equivalent in terms of opportunities, equivalent in terms of conditions or concerns that that both men and women might face, but the treatment of it might be different but still be equivalent, right? And this cannot be achieved unless and until men become a part of the conversation in a woman's health life, right? So this is something that we have actually nailed, trying to nail down at Masika, is creating a comprehensive care system where the stakeholders, and especially men stakeholders, either the spouse, the boyfriend, the partner, be it a brother or father, whoever it is, whoever is the male stakeholder within the family responsible, or who can participate in the particular patient's healthcare, is we are taking that active step to sensitize them more than sensitizing the women, right? So it is very important for us to involve the men into the female healthcare journey, for them to, because this is how we'll be able to bring about these changes, the systemic issues that I'm talking about, right? We eliminate men out of this conversation all the time. We say that, hey, no uterus, no opinion, things like that. We are never going to create space for men in this conversation. We will never be able to eradicate these systemic issues, right? So that is why this is one of the things that we are actually very focused on doing at Masika, is creating a comprehensive care model which involves men in the healthcare journey of women as equal partners, right? Like as a support system which understands, okay, this is what is the problem, this is how we are different, and this is how I could be effective in my partners, my sisters, my mothers, my wife's, healthcare journey, right? So I think one of the issues that we face is that, like, women are not willing to pay without asking.
And actually, so it's interesting that you mentioned this, because actually, so it's not just in terms of like in the health aspect of it, but so this is something that we're actually trying to do. All of the people here today is actually having gender champions, whether they're male, female, other genders, all of those kind of things across the board, not only in developing the solutions, but in offering support as well, finance, capital, all of those kind of things. So I think you're absolutely right in the sense that the conversation cannot be only women having this conversation. In fact, our panel needs to be more diverse from next time. But thank you so much for sharing this. We will come back to you in a few minutes, but I just definitely want to hear from our other speakers also today. Following Shraddha, we have Neelam. Neelam Jain is an entrepreneur as well. And, just speaking of the fact that, who all come and sit at the table and have these conversations, right? It cannot be only women. And I think Neelam is very well placed to talk about that as well, because of the work she does with transgender persons. So thank you so much for joining us today, Neelam, and over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm heard okay. Hi, can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you, Neelam.
Okay, super, awesome. So yeah, thank you all for joining in today. I'm going to quickly talk about how my journey began, what we do, and also some of the challenges that we face in the work that we do. I graduated in 2014 with a commerce degree. I worked with Goldman Sachs shortly after. I was into investment banking, financial services, etc. But interestingly for me, I never thought that I would be in this space or doing the work that I'm doing today. It was only when I joined Goldman that I learned more about various communities that exist, various people who are there, but we know very little about their lives or understand the kind of socioeconomic disparities that exist in their lives as well. One such group was the larger LGBTQ community. And Goldman back in, even back 2015, 2016 had a very thriving and a very inclusive network and an affinity group that worked for creating better spaces, ecosystems for the LGBT community. So I was a part of that as an ally, learned more about the community, learned more about their experiences as well. So that's really where my journey began. Just being a listener, just being a collaborator, a volunteer, understanding some of the challenges and the realities as well. But over the years, I grew extremely passionate about it and specifically wanted to tackle some of the challenges that are faced by the transgender community. So when you speak about trans people, the kind of disparities that exist are social, political, whether it's access to having a house like how all of us do, or whether it's just being able to walk freely on the road, jobs and everything else even comes in much later. But even the most basic of rights is something that is not available as easily. And the perception that we as a society have of the transgender community is also, not as great. It's been amplified by media. It's been amplified by the one or two experiences that we have on maybe a bus station or a traffic signal or whatever. So we wanted to focus very specifically on solving the problem of financial independence within the transgender community. And there are thousands of organizations that work in the space doing some phenomenal work, right from advocacy to health to even having rights for stay, all of that. But we felt that there was a huge gap in creating independence, which is financially liberating as well. So we decided to solve a very particular and a very focused issue, which was to create jobs and create jobs in an environment that are inclusive, and to create jobs where transgender people can actually grow and actually thrive and become leaders as well. So that's what we've been doing for the past 4.5 years. We've created jobs for roughly over 230 odd transgender people as of today. They work in organizations right from your Accenture, IBM, Walmart, some of these huge brands, retail brands as well, even organizations like SEAT, in manufacturing units, to even leadership positions in marketing firms, etc. So, this whole journey has, for me, been personally, I think, quite liberating, and I feel like there's so much that I've learned and taken away as well. And in the span of creating these jobs, we also ensured that we were creating an environment where these people can thrive. So actually sensitizing the co-workers, we've really created awareness and deep sensitization among 22,000 corporate Indian employees as of today. And all of that has really helped the people grow. I feel some of the biggest challenges that exist in this space, or working with any marginalized community for that matter, is one, and it's very fundamental, which is just gaining the trust. And especially if you're an outsider, like, take for example, maybe a man working on women's rights or women's issues. The situation for me could be very similar. I don't identify as a trans person, then who am I and what is my intent to be really doing this? So it takes immense time, courage, and I think a lot of patience to really build that sort of trust within the community, because the community is really closed off. Over the many centuries, we as a society have only taken advantage of the most marginalized of the lot, and transgender community has been used and abused in many ways, for photo op to everything else. So for them to really trust a cisgender person coming and saying that, hey, we will create jobs and you will have a better life, felt like a joke initially. But we proved through actions, and we proved through results. And that's the only thing we can do as well. And that's the only thing I knew how to do well. So we did that for the first 2 years. We met with a lot of rejection, but in the first 2 years when we had created roughly jobs for about 70, 80 people only by then, those people became the champions. Those people started speaking about the kind of experience they had with us, with my team, the experience they had once they joined the company, and a lot of influence began there. So that's one thing I strongly feel for anybody working in the space of social impact, that your intentions might be good and you might be doing this for whatever good reasons, but don't expect or think that people will always understand that, and there is a lot of patience that's required. I think even today we fight some of those challenges in our own ways. Second, and the most important thing, I think, for us to be sustainable, right now, as of today, we're touching our 5th year this May 2022. I think now we're backed by some of the largest organizations, but the first 3.5 years meant that we have to survive somehow or the other. And that meant that we're not going to charge the trans community anything. We're not going to charge our beneficiaries because we're working for them and with them. So we understood that, okay, we have to create so much value in our service that one party feels like, there is some worth and they put in their money as well. And so that's what we did. We started charging our corporate partners. We found a revenue source, and we really utilized that to build a team, to build infrastructure, to build processes that can be sustained. Again, it didn't come overnight. I speak about this in like maybe less than 5 minutes now, but it's taken years to really get there. And that's what I feel about, again, anything you do in this space. It's not that you can't earn money, but it is a hard road. And if you're not willing to take that hard road, then you might lose halfway. So yeah, I mean there are a list of challenges we can talk you through, but we're not supposed to be doing that. And then we're just very happy and excited for all of you to be taking on this journey, because it's personally empowering as well. So as much as you may think you're doing this for somebody else, which is true, it can personally be and professionally be one of the most exciting and empowering journeys, and the most wholesome learning journeys for yourself. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neelam. So just a few minutes. One, so you talked about building trust with the community, and I think this is something that happens a lot. Because a lot of people who kind of decide to start organizations are not necessarily from the community, right? Like, so it could be men making products for women, it could be people from urban areas making products for, say, rural women, all of those kind of things. What are good ways to build trust within the community? And if you had any
Sure.
tips or advice for people who are on that journey right now.
Yeah, no, I would say one of the most important things is to not try and grab, like they say, the center stage of it. And this is something that we very consciously do as well, that we realize that we as an organization stay on the peripherals, stay on the sides of the work we do, and we're enabling and empowering a community. But at no point we take the center stage, or we walk into, I don't know, take some credit for something that we shouldn't be, because leading the movement lies with the community. I think that's something we need to understand. And it's also important to ensure that you're empowering the community in this whole journey. I mean, not really being gatekeepers as such, but just having a view that this is not for you alone to solve. So as many people from the community that you can get. So whether it means having a very diverse team, yes, you need to. We're as an organization, we strive for that as well, that there should be more representation within the trans community, within our own organization as well, more than having cis people or anybody else. Ensuring that, if we're talking at events, talking at platforms, etc., and these are really big events, large scale work that you're doing, you do it in representation and with the community itself. So I think some of those things will really help. Just don't try to take the center spot when it's not your place to do that.
Super. Thank you so much. That is such simple but valuable advice. So it's so nice to hear that. Please do stay on for a little longer. There are actually some questions for you on chat. So whenever you have a moment, do respond to it. But I just want to hear just once from our final speaker, and then we'll open it out again for a few more questions. So thank you so much, Neelam, and over to you, Loy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Aditi. It's a great opportunity to be here with all the women and men to see what we can create and go forward today. Right. So, to talk about, to give a gist of what I'm going to be speaking about today, I'll introduce myself and my organization briefly. And then I will speak about some of the challenges that we have seen as we have worked with a lot of women entrepreneurs over the years. And to borrow a line from what Aditi shared in the beginning of the introduction, also speak about solutions for women and by women. Right, and I will conclude the conversation with what are some of the practices that we have seen across different organizations that can move us towards being gender equal and creating a space for gender diversity. My journey in the space of gender started off around 15 years ago when I did my master's, and I had a paper for gender over there. And as I was going through the course, I realized the world of equality that exists out there, the world of prejudice that exists out there, and the world of opportunities. And over the years, with multiple organizations, both government sector, private sector, NGOs, even trans-governmental organizations, I've interacted. And now, today, through Amani, I bring these learnings to all of you. I work with Amani Institute, as you can see on the screen, a global nonprofit that has been working with leadership and capacity building for over 10 years. And we have worked and interacted with over 10,000 individuals, 3,500 leaders in across 25 countries. And over these years that we have been working with, we've seen an increased importance for creating specific programs for women. And that is because we know, and we all know, that women entrepreneurs contribute a lot to the economic growth and stability of a country. Right, and we at Amani have been very fortunate to work with some of the women entrepreneurs in the country. In India, though the number of women entrepreneurs is less than 20%, but as I said, our journey, in that journey, we have interacted and worked with a lot of these women. In fact, last year, in 2020, we organized a program for women entrepreneurs across the country we call it the Wizen Project. It was a 6-month project that we did with women across the country where they brought the learnings together. And the success of that program, we are having a similar program this year as well for 20 women who are founders, co-founders of social enterprises based in non-metro cities in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. It's a fully funded, a completely free program for all the women. My colleague Ishta will share the link to that event and how you can be part of that program. Now, speaking about the learnings or the issues that we have faced, that women have shared with us rather over the years, there are 2 of them that have stood for us, which I thought I will bring to everybody's notice here. The first one that we have encountered when we have interacted with women across these years have been issues that are related to networking and to finding the right support. When I say support, it is in terms of resources, in terms of expertise, everything. And we've also found solutions for it as well. And this networking issue has been a very strong and a very prominent one with a lot of women. One example that I can share from the Wizen program that we had conducted last year was where a business venture that was based in Gujarat that works towards building and encouraging women to become sales agents for a menstrual hygiene company. They got connected with an organization, a social enterprise rather, that works in Tamil Nadu, that was looking to train women how to be sales agents for an agricultural firm. And this exchange of ideas then got connected to a venture in Kerala that again works with menstrual hygiene. And they were looking to scale up their program and their project. So in this interaction, the entity that was based in Kerala got an opportunity to expand states like Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. Right? So finding the right network and the right support is key to the growth of any business or any venture that we have. The second issue that we have come across and that has been shared with us is also issue that is related to women, where they speak about finding the relevant training program or finding the relevant capacity building program for them, because not all programs cater to their needs. Right? So how do we find those spaces? How do we equip ourselves? Like, we all need leadership, we all need strategy, fundraising, networking, etc. But how do we find those? And the key always lies in getting programs and events that are contextualized. And at Amani, that has been one of our key things to seek out for context that the women entrepreneurs come with. How do we train them? How do we work with them? Bringing experiential learning to them, as well as bringing application-based content. Right now, when I speak about these two issues, another issue that or another factor that gets connected is the right skills. What are the right skills that women require to thrive in the entrepreneurial world? Right, and this also comes to us because we've been in this space for some time, and over the years, what women entrepreneurs have taught us that yes, leadership is required, building strategy is required, your fundraising is required. Now, digital technology is required as well. But two things that we have learned from them. One of the primary skills that we've learned is having empathy, right? A skill that women innately possess, having empathy. Why empathy? Why empathy from all the other skills that we speak about? Because we interact with people and not with organizations, right? And empathy works both inwards as well as outward. So when I say outward, it works with customers very well, who feel really appreciated and cared for, right? And it works inwards as well, where employees feel connected, staff feels connected. And when you have that, get a better engagement, better inclusivity, and high retention as well. So when you have empathy, it gets connected to better relationship buildings as well. That stays longer and stronger. With empathy comes another important aspect that we saw a lot of women entrepreneurs display, especially during the time of COVID in the last 2 years. And that has been of agility. Being agile is so critical and so crucial to an entrepreneurship. So being nimble and being innovative is definitely central, but you add agility to it, and it becomes an ultimate and a big game changer, right? And we learned that agility and entrepreneurship, they're interdependent. They really go hand in hand, right? Now, again, when I speak about skills and I speak about issues, I'm also encouraged to speak about what makes then a place really gender diverse? What makes the place really gender equal, right? And we all know that one place to start off with where we can create gender equality and gender diversity is always by starting with a policy. Let's create a policy that addresses it. Let's create a policy that shows that we are gender diverse and gender equal. But what happens most of the time is that we just end there. We create a policy and we end it there, right? How do we go a little bit beyond? How do we make sure that we are really going behind mainstreaming gender, right? And two quick things that I will share here. Due to lack of time, I'm just restricting it to two, but we can have more conversations around it. One is creating a culture of being gender diverse and gender equal, and that is something that comes with when you create space for training, for coaching. And it is not just for founders and co-founders, it is also for people in the organization. Now, I may be gender aware, the other person may be gender aware, but to percolate that into the organization, I need to bring it down to my staff, to my team as well. And in that process, you can see that how different staff or different employees have different roles and capacities that they can fulfill to make the place more gender diverse, which can then guide your hiring process, which can then guide your development plans, your plans for training, your job description, another area where you can use all of it, right? So creating that culture is like the first space. The second space is accountability. Just like with any mechanism, any process that we create, once you have accountability systems in place, it shows how serious you are. It shows that how deeply you want and you care for it. And this can then reflect, your accountability measures can then reflect into your systems, your policies, your programs, etc. Right? And to conclude this whole conversation of skills, of issues, of challenges, etc. One of the heartwarming things, and this really comes from our heart, from our conversations with women, life stories from women. The road to entrepreneurship can sometimes be really lonely, and it can be really hard, right? And what works at that time is finding the right support, the right network, and the right investment. So as women entrepreneurs and others who are present here, it's really important to invest in yourself, because though Shraddha also shared, women don't have single responsibilities. We have multiple responsibilities. So we tend to place our businesses, our families in the forefront. And when you invest in yourself, in that road, you invest in your business, you invest in your family, and you invest in your community. That's it from my end. Thank you for
Super.
having
Thank
me
you
and
so
for
much, Lord.
patiently listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have, people are of course asking questions on chat. So when you have a moment, please do check there. Just want to take a few more minutes to just open it up to everybody. So one is actually, if panelists have questions for each other, you're more than welcome to talk to each other as well. I had a question for actually two of the people here who, so both Natasha and Neelam sort of work in spaces that are harder sells. They're more complex, complicated. They're not, right now at least, they're not the kind of things that people find like sexy, or not a lot of investment is going into it. So like your views on how you've navigated, both Natasha and Neelam, how you've navigated that space, given that it's both the areas that you work in are not something that people, it's still growing, right? Like it's not as sort of well known and well documented as a lot of other issues. How have you navigated it? Your advice again to other people who are trying to work with more complex challenges.
Neelam, do you want to go first? Should I go first?
Go first, Natasha. Go for it.
So first of all, I want to say, what Neelam said in the end is very important. It's super fulfilling. I've had to take really good care of my mental health though. So, I always say this to people. There's a lot of stigma around we do work, so take care of it. But I think for me, I think of it again, it's a little tough to have this conversation because you need a support system. So who will tell you that it will work? Because I've heard way more no's, and not just at funding level, but even like trying to legitimize why I'm doing what I'm doing to, when I'm trying to get access to a prison, why is it being turned down so many times? Because the idea of what you're doing is like, to be honest, somebody who breaks the law, we don't really care about them in South Asia. So this is the last thing, right? And there is way more funding for sexual reproductive health services. So even like the funders who offer me funding, I have to think twice, like, what is it in this? Like, are they trying to paint a certain whitewash perspective? So I think for me, community matters. I don't take a second to reach out to people who I think are doing this work. I'm trying to build that community myself. It's definitely personally fulfilling. There are avenues which are available in, and I almost am embarrassed to admit to this, but the international setup is actually way more supportive. So a lot of my support comes from that. Like the fact that I'm getting my PhD at Rutgers, that has been the game changer for me, right? And there are a lot of people who have invested in the project to just be like, because we see this becoming a thing later. So I think look internationally, I hate to say it just like that. Within India, the current government setup does allow a lot of these programs and research to happen, but they're not well funded. So I think it is important to have their buy-in. And I think you need to position yourself well on social media a lot because of it, right? You can't be anti everything because you're talking about really sensitive things that actually the country probably doesn't want people to study. So I think for me, it comes from a personal thing. I'm a woman. I want to see, women's rights represented in all spaces. So therefore, my buy-in is high. But I am always prepared for no's on the other side. And I think my international community, and now growing nationally community, is also helping. So yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Neelam, what do you think?
Yes, I'll just add on a little bit. So when we started Periphery in 2017, right, this was, I mean, if we think it's not as prevalent now to do this work, I think 2017, it was just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you trying to do? It was like that. But I think what really helped us out was, a lot of laws changed around us. In 2018, we had Section 377 that was decriminalized. Over the last 2-3 years, a trans bill that came in although it's a little problematic, there are some issues with it as well, but it larger propagated the whole movement as well. So I feel like for those people who may be feeling like, it's not picked up yet, it will pick up. And being an early mover, whether it's a business or social impact, is a great thing. What that also means is that you will have to hold on, be patient, and at the same time, all that we can do is really create value for your beneficiaries and value for the people who are funding in you. Like, what do we have that we will receive funding year after year after year for few more decades together, even if 50 other organizations don't come. And even now, the way we function is that it's not that we have too many organizations backing us up, but I think the biggest win for us has been even one organization like an ANZ that's put in their money, helped us set up an infrastructure in Bangalore. We run trainings and we're able to help about 150 people per year just through that one unit. So having the right, kind of people with the same mindset, holding on to them is equally important as well. So that's my thoughts on it.
Okay. So just only in the interest of time, otherwise I think this conversation could go on for a really long time. In fact, I think we've not done you justice by giving you such little time. However, maybe final. What I'm asking, what I want to ask all of you is that we're actually this panel this conversation is part of a challenge that we're running, and the challenge is to support entrepreneurs who are building solutions for various topics and various issues around gender. So what would be, if you have like one thing to kind of tell them to focus on, whatever it is, if it's just like a blank slate, from all four of you, what would you have to say to some of the entrepreneurs who have joined us today? They're thinking about something, they're building something, just blank slate. What would you say to them? What should they be thinking about? What should they be doing?
I can go first if
I'm
you
gonna
want me to.
go
Go ahead, Neelam.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think the first thing that came to my mind when you asked this was just the team that I work with. And given most of the work that all of us would be doing is extremely challenging, if you have the right set of people, the right team who believes in this is important. So I would say that when you're working on this, you cannot do so much alone, but with a great team, you can really, really, really conquer a lot, both mentally and in terms of creating impact as well. So find the right set of people, work on that, and really nurture relationships with your teams, your people, because that would go a long way, even if nothing else remains. So yeah.
Thank you. Shraddha, do we still have you here? Okay, we'll come back to Shraddha. Go ahead, Loy, and for Natasha, you can follow Loy.
Okay, I think I will just put it in one line, like I even spoke about when I was speaking earlier, is to find the right network and the right support, right? And as long as you have that, you can go to any you can take great strides in your business, in your ventures. And these are, again, things that women have shared with us, learned over the years. So the right network gets you there.
Super. Thank you.
And the researcher in me will say, do your research. Very often we want to come up with solutions for things that already have solutions, right? So for somebody who studies violence and abuse, there's a lot of research around domestic violence. I know it's very personal, but there are so many other issues. So whenever I talking to people taking up criminal justice research and looking, I'm like, look beyond what you think interests you, and do a lot of reading. So I feel like there is a lot out there, and very often when I'm like looking at grant applications, I'm like, oh, this person hasn't read. So I learned a lot of humility. Don't ever say nothing else exists, there are no solutions for this. Somebody has probably researched it, right? So do your research, and then let that be a well-informed issue that you want to find a solution to.
Super. Thank you so much. I think that's gold. So do your research, make well-informed decisions. And obviously, while you're building the solution, it's really important to surround yourself with really good people, because those are the ones who are going to help you along the way. And beyond the people in your organization, the larger communities like this, we are all here to help you with that. Thank you guys so much for sharing this with us today. Really, only because of time I'm moving on, and I know people lead like pretty hectic online lives now. So with that, thank you so much, and I'm going to hand over to Bea.
Thank you, Aditi, and thank you also so much to the four of you. It's really been amazing to hear all of you speak about what you're doing and this whole discussion. I think, as Aditi said, we have barely even scratched the surface, and there's still so much to talk about. But just I think also with that in mind, that's why we came up with this whole program, and that's why we're here putting it out there. And so basically, just a little bit about what it is and what we're doing. So Close the Gap is a grand challenge where we aim to kind of source and support women entrepreneurs and organizations that are working on solutions for gender equality, to solve issues in gender equality. So before starting with all of this, we did talk to other people who were working in the ecosystem and who are working on issues surrounding gender equality. And because it is quite broad, it's a very broad topic, and we needed to find kind of different issues to kind of focus on. And so from those discussions, we found these 6 issues, and we have turned them into problem statements. So these are, the first one is, how might we improve economic and livelihood opportunities for women and girls? The second is, how might we create gender equal and diverse workplaces for women and underrepresented groups? The third is, how might we improve sexual and reproductive health for women and girls? The fourth is, how might we enable better recognition for unpaid work by women and girls? The fifth is, how might we create better economic opportunities that empower transgender people? And the fifth is, how might we improve discourse around physical and emotional abuse of women and girls? All right, so how does the program work? So the first step is you need to apply. So we will be posting the link under to apply, but you can also find the link on all of our social media platforms. And for some of you, you've received an email with all of the information as well. Then there will be a selection interview from which a short list of participants will be chosen. Afterwards, you will receive a pitch workshop where you'll be able to refine your pitch and your solution. And this pitch workshop will also come with a week of mentor hours. And lastly, there will be a pitch day where you'll be pitching in front of a panel. And from this, 2 winners will be selected. All right, so who is it for? So first of all, it's for women-led businesses who are based in India. So it's for women-led for-profits or non-profits under Section 25. And they have to be currently solving or intend to solve a gender equality issue. But just to clarify this also, the business model itself doesn't have to be aimed at gender equality. You can be a business doing some in another industry, but are currently coming up with a project that deals with gender equality or with one of the issues that we mentioned previously, or you can have a program that's geared towards one of those issues as well. And so you have to have been working on this solution for at least 6 months already. So a little bit past ideation stage, you have to have, maybe tested your product already and things like that. Okay, so participants will receive a pitch workshop or pitch masterclass, as we said, with our mentors. They'll also receive mentor hours to refine their pitches and their solutions, and they'll have access to Nushu Network. So on top of all of this, the chosen winners will receive an award stipend of up to 1,000 euros to be able to further their solutions. So just a little bit about what to expect from the timeline. Our deadlines for applications are on December 20, 2021, and the shortlist of entrepreneurs will be announced on January 10. So the interviews will happen around the first week of January. The Pitch Masterclass will be on January 18, 2022, and the Pitch Mentor Hours will happen from January 19 to 27. And then the final pitch day will be on January 28th.